The year is 1878, and Dodge City is teetering between law and lawlessness. Bat Masterson has risen quickly, too quickly for some, from buffalo hunter to county sheriff. But in this episode, the badge comes with a price. A daring train robbery sets the plains ablaze, testing Bat's nerve in the frozen wilds. And closer to home, the bond between two brothers, Bat and Ed Masterson, will be pushed to the breaking point on the dust-choked streets of Dodge. This is Chronicles of the Old West, Episode 4 of Steel and Silk, The Life of Bat Masterson, Blood on Front Street.
The wind howled across the Kansas plains, driving fine grit into every crevice of Dodge City's weather-beaten buildings. It was the fall of 1877, and a young man named William Barclay, Bat Masterson, was stepping into his destiny. Just shy of his 24th birthday, Bat had traded his buffalo hunter's garb for the badge of law, and Ford County was about to find out what kind of sheriff they had elected. The announcement had come through the pages of the Dodge City Times, his words simple and without polish, the mark of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than behind a desk. "I am no politician," he declared, "and shall make no combinations that would in any wise hamper me in the discharge of the duties of the office." The Shin brothers, editors of the paper, approved. They wrote of Bat's nerve and coolness in cases of danger, and assured voters that the young man knew just how to gather in the sinners. When the ballots were counted on November 6, 1877, Bat Masterson edged out his old rival, Larry Dager, by the narrowest of margins. 166 votes to 163. 3 votes. That was all that separated Bat from obscurity or making his name as one of the most famous lawmen of the West. For Bat, it was a remarkable rise. Just months earlier, he had been better known as a buffalo hunter and gambler than a politician. But the people of Ford County wanted someone young, fearless, and unconnected to the old political machine. Bat's cool gray eyes, his reputation for steady nerve in a gunfight, and his promise to enforce the law without bowing to political pressure carried him to victory. At just 24, he suddenly became the supreme lawman of a vast, untamed empire, nearly 9,500 square miles of Kansas frontier stretching from the Arkansas River to the Colorado line. In that huge expanse, his word was final. Outlaws, train robbers, and horse thieves had good reason to look over their shoulders. But Bat knew he couldn't rule such a wild country alone. He wasted no time assembling a team of men he trusted with his life. His first choice was obvious. Charlie Bassett, his longtime friend, former mentor, and one of the most respected peace officers in the West. Bassett accepted the position of undersheriff, giving Bat a seasoned partner who knew Dodge City's streets better than anyone. Simeon Woodruff was brought on as deputy, though his tenure was short-lived. He was soon replaced by William Duffy, a plains-wise former Indian scout who could read sign in the sand as easily as a man might read a newspaper. John Strong, reliable and tough, became the jailer, overseeing the roughest collection of prisoners Dodge would ever see. But Bat's real strength came from the men he could call upon when things got truly dangerous. His list of special deputies was a veritable who's who of frontier legends. Josh Webb, a former lawman turned saloon owner who still had the reflexes of a gunfighter. Prairie Dog Dave Morrow, a veteran peace officer whose sharp ears had earned him his nickname. Kinch Riley, a hulking young plainsman with scars from more than one close scrape. Miles Mix, another trusted plainsman. Bill Tillman, who would later earn his own place among the great lawmen of the West. Wyatt Earp, who at the time was still building the reputation that would make him a legend. And finally, Bat's own younger brother, Jim Masterson, steady-handed and loyal. It was a formidable team, men who could track a horse thief for days, face down a mob of armed cowboys, or ride into the teeth of a blizzard after train robbers. And with them at his side, Bat Masterson was ready to turn Ford County from a lawless stretch of prairie into a place where justice had teeth. But Bat was restless. He had not taken the badge to sit behind a desk, and within days of taking his oath, fate handed him his first real test. January 17th, 1878. The telegraph wires hummed with the news. 6 masked bandits had twice attempted to rob Santa Fe trains near Kinsley, Kansas. Their first attempt, at a water tank east of town, failed when the engineer refused to stop. Their second, bolder effort came when they stormed the station as the westbound Pueblo Express rolled in. It was a night of flashing guns and shouted warnings. A young telegraph operator named Kincaid, held at gunpoint, made a daring leap across the tracks, putting the train between himself and the robbers. His cry of warning sent the train crew scrambling for rifles. Shots cracked in the darkness, bullets sparking against steel, and the outlaws were driven back into the cold. They escaped empty-handed, their raid a humiliating failure. But the incident lit a fire across the plains. Rewards were posted, posses saddled up, and the chase was on. Edwards County Sheriff Fuller organized search parties, and even the U.S. cavalry took to the field. But after days of scouring the Arkansas River country, the bandits vanished into the sand hills. The Santa Fe Railroad was furious, and in Dodge City, Bat Masterson got the call he had been waiting for. Bat accepted the task with quiet resolve, deputizing 3 men who knew the sandhill country as well as he did, and who, if it came to a fight, would not hesitate to pull the trigger. Josh Webb, former peace officer turned saloon owner, Prairie Dog Dave Morrow, a grizzled lawman with pointed ears that gave him his nickname, and Kinch Riley, a young giant with scars to prove his courage. On January 29, 1878, the 4 men rode south into the teeth of a winter storm. The north wind cut like a blade, and by the time they reached Crooked Creek, snow was falling thick. They camped for 2 nights, huddling against the biting cold, before pressing on to Harry Lovell's ranch at the mouth of the creek. Lovell hadn't seen the bandits, but Bat was certain they would eventually seek shelter. Ranches were few in this desolate land, and Lovell's place was as good a refuge as any. Bat concealed his men in a dugout nearby, posted watches, and waited. The storm raged on. The dugout walls creaked in the wind. The men spoke little, their breath frosting in the frigid air. Then, on the second evening, Kinch Riley spotted 4 riders approaching through the swirling snow. Bat peered through the dugout's narrow cracks and felt his pulse quicken. 2 of the riders were instantly recognizable: Dave Rudabaugh and Ed West, notorious outlaws with reputations as cold-blooded killers. The other 2 were Lovell's cowhands, apparently unaware of the company they kept. The outlaws reined up, uneasy, sniffing danger. The cowboys, eager for warmth, urged them forward. Josh Webb slipped outside, his coat collar turned against the cold, and met them halfway. He greeted Rudabaugh casually, spinning a story about being caught in the blizzard on a business trip. The outlaw's suspicious gaze softened as Webb chatted amiably, walking alongside the horses. When the group drew close to the dugout, Bat made his move. The door burst open, and Bat leapt into the snow, his rifle leveled. "Throw up your hands," he snapped. Riley and Morrow fanned out at his sides, pistols drawn. West obeyed instantly, his hands shooting skyward. Rudabaugh, however, went for his gun. His hand froze halfway as Webb cocked his six-shooter with an audible click behind him. Slowly, grudgingly, Rudabaugh raised his hands. Kinch Riley stepped forward to disarm them. Colts, a Sharps rifle, and a government carbine were pulled from their persons. But Bat's sharp eyes caught one last bulge beneath Rudabaugh's coat. As Bat reached for the hidden revolver, the outlaw lunged. For an instant, the two men grappled, their boots sliding in the snow. Bat wrenched the weapon free, shoving Rudabaugh back with cold fury. The fight was over. The hunters had their prey. On February 1st, Bat rode into Dodge with his prisoners. Rudabaugh and West were locked in the calaboose, awaiting transport to Kinsley. But Bat's work wasn't done. Adams Express Company agents handed him a surprise order. Arrest a Dodge City man suspected of being an accomplice. The name stunned him. Bill Tillman, his old buffalo hunting partner. Tillman protested bitterly as Bat placed him in shackles. But Bat had no choice. The three were taken to Kinsley, where Rudabaugh and West were bound over for trial. The case against Tillman quickly collapsed, and he was released. But Bat's star was on the rise. Newspapers across Kansas sang his praises. The Times called the capture a brilliant achievement, maneuvered with the skill of a warrior. Even his political enemies grudgingly admitted he had done what no other posse could. Barely 10 days later, Bat was back in the saddle, leading another posse in search of the remaining train robbers. With him rode Charlie Bassett, Josh Webb, Miles Mix, and rancher Red Clark, their wagon loaded with provisions for a long chase. For 13 days they rode across Crooked Creek, through the Cimarron Breaks, and down into the staked plains of Texas. They followed the trail relentlessly, sometimes riding 30 hours without food or rest. Twice they missed their quarry by mere hours. When at last the trail vanished in the trackless Texas wilderness, Bat turned his weary men back toward Dodge. But he wasn't finished. On March 15th, within the very limits of Dodge City, he cornered two more gang members, Tom Gott and J.D. Green. The arrests were swift and without bloodshed, and editor Dan Frost, who had once doubted Bat, shouted his praise in print, "Hurrah for our officers! They have done well." In the months that followed, the gang's story unraveled. Rudabaugh turned state's evidence, betraying his own men to avoid prison. West, Gott, and Green were sentenced to hard labor in Leavenworth. Mike Rourke, the elusive leader, was finally captured near Ellsworth later that year. The sixth man, Tillman, slipped away for good. As for Rudabaugh, his betrayal bought him temporary freedom, but his soul was too wild for honest living. Within a year, he was back in New Mexico, riding with Billy the Kid and leaving a bloody trail across the Southwest. His eventual fate, murdered in Mexico, his head displayed on a pike, would be as violent as his life. But all that was yet to come. In the winter of 1878, the name Bat Masterson had become a symbol on the Kansas plains. A cool-headed young sheriff who hunted train robbers through blizzards and across desolate country, bringing them to justice with courage and steel nerve. And Bat was only getting started. By the spring of 1878, Bat Masterson was riding high. His capture of the Kinsley train robbers had made his name known from Kansas to Colorado. For Bat Masterson, wearing a badge wasn't just about upholding the law. It was about loyalty, duty, and above all, family. Nothing made that clearer than his bond with his older brother, Ed Masterson. When he won the election for sheriff of Ford County in November of 1877, his jurisdiction stretched far beyond Dodge City, covering a vast expanse of Kansas prairie that ran clear to the Colorado line. But within Dodge itself, Bat had no authority. That was Ed's domain. Ed Masterson had taken a very different path into law enforcement than his younger brother. Where Bat saw the badge as a way to impose order on a lawless frontier, and perhaps test himself against the kind of dangerous men he had once ridden alongside, Ed's reasons were simpler, almost personal. Ed believed Dodge City needed men who could keep the peace without adding to the bloodshed. A genial man by nature, he had a natural gift for calming hot tempers and easing tension with a quiet word or a steady look. But more than that, Ed liked people. He understood the cowboys who poured into Dodge after long cattle drives, tired and half-crazed from weeks in the saddle. He liked the merchants and the families who wanted a safe town to raise their children in. He wanted Dodge to be more than just a cattle stop where men drank, gambled, and occasionally died in the street. Bat looked the part of the fearless lawman, broad-shouldered, confident, with the air of a man who expected to be obeyed. Ed, by contrast, carried himself with quiet humility. He never looked for a fight, never tried to show off his skill with a gun. But when duty called, he never backed away, no matter how dangerous the odds. For Ed, wearing a badge wasn't about glory or reputation. It was about helping a town he had grown to care for, keeping order, protecting lives, and doing it with as little killing as possible. At first, Ed served as assistant marshal under Larry Digger, but Ed's reputation grew quickly, especially after a tense standoff between Digger and the town's own political boss, Mayor Jim Kelly. In the middle of the night, after Digger had jailed one of Kelly's allies, Kelly ordered Ed to arrest his own superior officer. Guns were nearly drawn, tempers flared, but Ed, with a cool voice and steady nerve, calmed the situation, convincing Digger to submit to arrest and keeping blood off the floor of Dodge City's streets that night. By December, Digger was removed and Ed Masterson was named city marshal. At just 25 years old, he and Bat held the two most powerful law enforcement positions in all of Ford County. Bat Masterson had a very specific philosophy when it came to wearing a badge. A lawman, he believed, needed three qualities to survive: courage, skill with a gun, and, most importantly, deliberation. That last trait was what Bat considered the dividing line between life and death. Deliberation meant keeping a cool head, never rushing into a fight, never letting emotion guide your hand. As Bat once put it, plenty of brave and lightning-fast gunmen had died because they acted a second too soon, or hesitated a second too long. Ed Masterson had the first two qualities in abundance. No one questioned his courage, and he was as fast with a Colt as any man in Dodge. But deliberation, the cold calculation Bat prized, didn't come naturally to him. Ed had a softer heart. Where Bat viewed the streets of Dodge as a chessboard, every move carefully weighed, Ed approached people like an old friend, even when they were drunk, armed, and spoiling for a fight. He liked people too much, and he believed most of them. Even the wild Texas cowboys who stampeded through Dodge during cattle season were more foolish than truly dangerous. He treated them with a kind of tolerant good humor, often giving them more chances than Bat thought wise. To Bat, that leniency was a crack in the armor. Ed's refusal to see the worst in men left him vulnerable. And in Dodge City, where a man could go from laughing over whiskey to pulling a trigger in the span of a heartbeat, vulnerability was a deadly thing. In the spring of 1878, that very flaw, the kindness that made Ed so well-liked, would cost him. The first real sign that Dodge City's new marshal might be too soft for the job came on November 5th, 1877, inside one of the wildest joints on Front Street, the Lone Star Dance Hall. The Lone Star was the kind of place where whiskey flowed like water, where cowboys slammed their hats on faro tables, gamblers played for keeps, and arguments were often settled with hot lead rather than words. That night, Bob Shaw, a hard-drinking gambler with a reputation for trouble, was deep in his cups and spoiling for a fight. He accused another regular, Texas Dick Moore, of robbing him of $40, a sum big enough to get a man killed in Dodge. Shaw shoved his way through the smoke-filled hall, a pistol already in his fist, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Patrons ducked behind tables as he leveled the gun at Moore's chest. Someone bolted for the door and ran to fetch Ed Masterson. When Ed stepped through the swinging doors moments later, the scene was pure chaos. Men were pressed against the walls, tables overturned, and in the center stood Shaw, his finger tight on the trigger, murder in his eyes. Texas Dick, unarmed and cornered, had nowhere to go. Ed moved slowly, his voice calm but firm. "Put the gun down, Shaw," he said. "This isn't the way." Shaw ignored him, his pistol unwavering. Ed had always preferred to settle things with words rather than bullets. He hated killing, even when it was justified. "Hand it over," he ordered again, stepping closer. "Stay back, Masterson," Shaw snarled, his face twisting with rage. But Ed kept coming. He swung the butt of his Colt in a sharp arc, cracking Shaw across the back of the head, a move meant to knock him cold without bloodshed. Any other man might have gone down, but Shaw, half-crazed and whiskey-strong, didn't flinch. Instead, he wheeled and fired. The shot slammed into Ed's right breast, smashing against his ribs, spinning through his chest, and dropping him hard to the floor. His gun hand went numb instantly, the Colt slipping from his right grip. But Ed Masterson was no ordinary man. Even as he fell, instinct and training took over. In one fluid motion, what gunfighters called the border shift, he caught his Colt in his left hand, cocked the hammer, and fired. The first slug tore into Shaw's left arm, spinning him sideways. The second punched into his thigh, sending him crashing to the floor. The room erupted in screams as bullets ricocheted off walls. Somewhere in the chaos, Texas Dick caught a round in the groin, likely from Shaw's wild shooting. And a curious onlooker named Frank Buskirk, peering through the doorway, took a grazing shot to the arm for his trouble. When the smoke cleared, Shaw was down, bleeding and cursing. Texas Dick groaned on the floor, clutching his wound. Ed lay slumped against the bar, blood soaking his shirt, his breath coming hard, but he was alive. The next morning, the Dodge City Times praised Ed's courage, calling his nerve and pluck a credit to the town. He healed fast, and within weeks he was back walking his beat, smiling and tipping his hat as if nothing had happened. But Bat Masterson wasn't fooled. From his office at the county courthouse, Bat worried. His younger brother's easygoing nature had nearly cost him his life once. In Dodge City, being too kind, too trusting, could get a lawman killed. And Bat couldn't help wondering, would it happen again? It was a warm spring evening in Dodge City, April 9th, 1878. The air carried the dry tang of cattle and dust, swirling through the narrow streets as lamplights spilled from the South Side dance halls. Music and laughter drifted into the night, but beneath it all was the tension that always came with a town full of trail-weary cowboys. City Marshal Ed Masterson walked along the boardwalk with Officer Nat Haywood at his side, his expression calm, his stride unhurried. When they pushed through the swinging doors of Josh Webb's Lady Gay Saloon, the noise hit them like a wave. Fiddle music screeched from a corner, Boots stomped against the scarred wooden floor, and smoke hung low under the oil lamps. At a table near the bar, a group of Texas cowboys was raising hell. Alf Walker, a veteran trail boss, sat among them, drink in hand. But it was one of his men, Jack Wagner, who drew Ed's attention. Wagner was roaring drunk, his face flushed, his voice loud enough to cut through the music. A six-shooter rode openly in a shoulder holster, gleaming in the lamplight. Ed stepped forward, moving slowly, deliberately. He was known for that easy, measured way, never rushing, never showing anger, until it was absolutely necessary. "Check your gun," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. Dodge City ordinance was clear. No firearms in town. For a moment, Wagner swayed on his feet, staring at the marshal. Then, surprisingly, he unbuckled the holster and handed over the pistol without argument. Ed nodded once and turned to Walker. "Make sure it's left with the bartender," he instructed, trusting the trail boss to follow through. Then he and Haywood stepped back outside, breathing in the cool night air after the heavy, whiskey-soaked atmosphere of the saloon. But the peace lasted only seconds. The Lady Gay's doors swung open behind them, and Jack Wagner stumbled out onto the boardwalk. His coat flared in the breeze, and Ed's sharp eyes caught the glint of steel under his arm. Walker had given the weapon back. Ed's jaw tightened. For a man known for his easygoing nature, irritation rarely showed, but this time it did. He stepped toward Wagner. "You weren't told to carry that," he said, reaching for the gun. Wagner jerked back, and in an instant, the two men were grappling. Their boots scraped across the boardwalk as they wrestled for control, drawing the attention of the saloon crowd, which poured out into the street, forming a loose circle around them. Haywood moved in to help, but Alf Walker stepped forward, gun already drawn. He shoved the barrel into Haywood's face and pulled the trigger. Click! The hammer dropped on a bad round, the misfire saving Haywood's life by sheer luck. But Ed was not so lucky. Wagner ripped his pistol free, shoved the muzzle against Ed's side, and fired. The blast lit up the night, the smell of burned cloth and gunpowder filling the air. The bullet tore clean through Ed's abdomen, exiting near his left side. His shirt caught fire from the close-range shot as he staggered backward, his face pale. But Ed Masterson didn't fall. His Colt was in his hand almost before anyone realized he had drawn. 4 shots cracked through the night, so fast they blended into one roar, like a Gatling gun, one witness said later. The first bullet slammed into Wagner's gut, folding him instantly and dropping him to the dusty street. The other 3 ripped into Walker, one smashed into his chest, the other 2 shattered his right arm, sending his pistol clattering into the dirt. Walker stumbled, coughing blood, and staggered into a nearby saloon before collapsing. In the span of seconds, the gunfight was over. Smoke curled in the lamplight as silence fell over the crowd. Wagner writhed in agony on the boardwalk. Walker's blood trailed into the shadows, and Ed Masterson, his shirt still smoldering, stood unsteady, his Colt trembling slightly in his hand. His face was pale, his eyes fixed straight ahead, but he was still on his feet. For now. Smoke hung over the street as Wagner collapsed into the arms of Ham Bell inside A.J. Peacock's saloon. "Catch me, I'm dying," Wagner gasped. Bell let him slide to the floor. "I can't help you now," he replied grimly. Walker stumbled in moments later, coughing blood, his mangled arm dripping. He surrendered his pistol before collapsing. And then came Ed Masterson, walking unsteadily, his shirt scorched, his side torn open. He crossed the plaza, staggering 200 yards to Hoover's saloon, where he fell to the floor and whispered to bartender George Hinkle, "George, I'm shot." He was carried to his room, but there was nothing to be done. Ed died 40 minutes later, never regaining consciousness. The news spread like wildfire. Dodge City went silent. Businesses closed their doors. Black crepe hung from storefronts. The Ford County Globe described the scene. Every door is draped with crepe. Business is entirely suspended. Never before was such honor shown in Dodge, either to the living or the dead. The next day, Jack Wagner died of his wounds. Alf Walker, though gravely injured, lingered for weeks before being taken back to Texas. Some accounts say he later died of pneumonia from his wounds. In the years that followed, a legend grew, one that claimed Bat Masterson avenged his brother that night, gunning down the Texans in a storm of bullets. Some said Bat killed 7 men in a blazing shootout. Others swore he stood 60 feet away, cutting down Wagner and Walker with deadly accuracy. But the truth was far less sensational than the dime novel versions that would later circulate. Contemporary newspaper accounts leave little doubt. It was Ed Masterson, not Bat, who fired the shots that brought down Jack Wagner and Alf Walker. Bat wasn't even at the Lady Gay Saloon when the shooting happened. When the news reached him, Bat went straight to his brother's side. He stayed with Ed through those final, agonizing minutes, holding vigil until his older brother slipped away. Only then did Bat act, not as a grieving brother out for blood, but as a lawman. He quietly swore out warrants for the other cowboys involved in the fracas and had them arrested within the hour. There was no roaring gun battle in the streets, no cold-blooded vendetta. Bat Masterson did what he had always done, his duty. Ed Masterson was buried first in the military cemetery at Fort Dodge. A year later, his body was moved to Prairie Grove Cemetery, and later still to Maple Grove as Dodge expanded. But somewhere in the shuffle, his exact resting place was lost. Years later, Bat, then living in New York, tried to locate his brother's grave to erect a monument. He never found it. Dodge City mourned deeply. The Globe wrote, "They liked him as a boy. They liked him as a man. And they liked him as an officer." Bat mourned, too, but in his own way. Ed's death hardened him. He had seen what leniency could cost a lawman in Dodge. From then on, Bat Masterson would walk the narrow line between justice and survival with sharper eyes and a colder hand. The next chapters of his life would test that resolve even further.
Bat Masterson came to Dodge City a marksman and a gambler, a young man trying to carve out his place on the frontier. But when he pinned on the sheriff's star of Ford County, the stakes changed. Suddenly, the wild prairie, the outlaws, and the cattle trails all answered to his word. And alongside him stood his brother Ed, a gentler hand, a softer voice, a man who believed Dodge could be tamed without bloodshed. That hope died in the smoke of the Lady Gay Saloon. Ed's fall hardened Bat, teaching him what the Buffalo Range could not, that mercy could cost a lawman everything. Here at Chronicles of the Old West, we don't just tell history, we step inside it. Through frontier newspapers, courtroom records, and the voices of those who lived and bled under its wide skies. If this journey deepened your sense of the West, or gave new weight to a name you thought you knew, consider leaving a rating, a review, or sharing it with someone who believes the past should still speak. Bat Masterson's story doesn't end on Front Street. His star is rising, his legend spreading, and the next chapters will take him far beyond Dodge, into deserts, mountains, and the pages of history itself. Subscribe now for the next episode of Steel and Silk, The Life of Bat Masterson, only here on Chronicles of the Old West.